Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm Diana Skaya. Germany is resetting its priorities, tightening refugee support, boosting defense spending, and pledging new weapons for Ukraine, while across Europe, the question is no longer if, but how to unlock frozen Russian assets. I'm joined in studio by former Polish ambassador to Germany and France, Mr. Andrzej Byrt. Ambassador, so happy to have you here with us in the studio on this morning. So, let's talk about here initially about Germany's defense priorities. Why is now strengthening the German army becoming a big priority? It's top priority for Merz's government. And how is this going to shift the role, right? Germany's role in Europe? How do you see this happening?
Well, there are at least two major grounds. First is the development of the attack of Russia on Ukraine and the consequences, military, as well as, I would say, the spreading on different methods of fighting Ukrainian defense, but also aggressing other countries adjacent to the frontiers of Ukraine. Let's imagine the drone attacks on Germany, Sweden, or Denmark and Poland, right? As well as much more aggressive presence of Russian military fleet on the Baltic Sea, and last but not least, also strengthening and more active inroads of Russian planes within the space of NATO member countries. On the other hand, however, is also, let's say, the political pressure which was exerted on Germany by particularly the new American president, Donald Trump, who just very often had repeatedly said, you Europeans, you should give more money to defend yourselves, because our interests will be moving towards Asia and Pacific Ocean, and therefore, in case of a much more aggressive steps being taken by Putin and his government, then you will have to rely to a much higher extent than it was the case so far on your own forces. So Germany, as the most powerful country within the European Union, has also decided to step up and also strengthen both funding as well as reorganizing its military force, the Bundeswehr.
But do you think that it's actually going to be realistically be able to finance both, how you said, the Bundeswehr expansion and rising international commitments without breaking its own fiscal rules?
Such steps cannot be taken overnight, that's clear. Germany, as you remember, did decide, as a matter of fact, in 2022, to set up a special fund of 100 billion euro to modernize Bundeswehr, and they already has started to do so, which means try to bring more sophisticated military equipment, also taking account of American technologies, not only European, which was kind of a big break in the philosophy so far presented by German military and political groups. Second point, which was the envisaging the possibility of reintroducing the conscript system, which was not so far, which is suspended, as a matter of fact. Right. Yes, and now they would like to reach 260,000 soldiers by 2035. Now they have only 183 million, and therefore it will require bringing at least 80,000, which is quite a big change. And then also the changing the philosophy of bringing people into the military service. Particularly, they would like to take care of the fact what the North European countries did in the past, which was particularly Nordic countries, they rely, of course, on conscripts, but also on quite a big share of volunteers who can be brought into the military service through special incentives, both financial but also status-oriented. And therefore, Germany would like, beside these 260,000 soldiers in the year 2035, also to have 200,000 reservists, people who will be trained but will not be brought into the army. However, in case of an emergency, they can be immediately used as military support forces.
And ready
so
to
that's a very extensive program and a big change. It will require an extra funding, but the European Union, reacting on the situation in the East, have already decided that this extra spending will not be calculated into the existing system of an appraisal of rationality in spending budgetary funds, which means that countries trying to increase their military defense forces will not be treated as those who spend à la légère their money, which is very important change because German's budget was in this field had a very restrictive framework. It will be now relaxed and to a certain extent will allow extra financing. And then comes the purchases of equipment. They would like to change their flying fleet by buying from the United States the F-35 military jets, which will be quite an expensive step, but however necessary one.
And Germany also wants to provide Ukraine, right, with also that equipment.
Well, that's it, which will require an extra financing. So therefore the idea, which have been launched quite several times since at least 2022, to use the Russian finances deposited in various centers in the West, to use this money to finance the defense spending by Ukraine and the European NATO countries.
How do you think, before I get into that EU and the frozen assets with Merz, I want to ask you, there's another thing that Merz told, of course, Zelensky earlier on, and it was that he believes that too many are leaving Ukraine, right? Since Ukraine had stopped that cap of under 23 and heading on to Germany, and he's going to cut some social benefits, right? And
That's
how do you use that? What else can you tell me? Can you tell me more about this? How is it going to, look like? I mean, what are going to be the obstacles? What can we expect?
In Germany, as well as very many other countries, including Poland, there had been certain doubts whether the spending for financing the refugees from Ukraine is a rational one.
Right.
So also the same debate took place in Germany, and as a result of that, during debates in Bundestag, the Parliament of Germany, the politicians decided to change the entire system, which means reduce the money devoted to keeping up afloat the Ukraine refugees. The idea was to reduce this amount of money called Bürgergeld, citizens' money, of 122 euro per head, for an adult head, of course, per month. It will reduce, it should be also treated as kind of an incentive to look more for a job, because the German economy need quite a number of manpower, and great majority of those who went to Germany from Ukraine have already started to look for a new job, and very many of them have already found. However, not all, and therefore the major, so to say, lobbies for such solutions is the Bavarian Prime Minister Markus Söder, who said, right, we should take care of the fact that very many young male adults from Ukraine are coming to us, and they should remain rather in their own country and fight for their independence. So eventually the Bundestag has decided that since next year, March next year, the system will be reformed, the spending reduced, and then although all those who had obtained temporary protection under German and European law will be able to remain, provided they will try to find a work and work.
How do you think that Germany's evolving approach about Ukrainian, refugees and all compared to Poland's strategy for supporting them here?
Well, different countries has applied different, so to say, ways to cope with the general directive of the European Union to to reform the system of of offering protection for Ukrainian refugees. The great majority has accepted this directive, EU decision automatically. Some others, for instance, Poland belongs to them, together with the Netherlands and Austria. We will require from Ukrainian living in Poland to apply electronically to respective authorities, and they will obtain the right to remain for next 3 years in our country, provided they fulfill certain requirements, particularly the work, to be employed. Although there'll be probably a system, that is the idea launched by the European Union, also a special work stay permits, permanent permits for humanitarian reasons, and eventually maybe there'll be a kind, it's a project, of course, not yet a decision, to envisage a special refugee status on the basis of a kind of a certificates offered for everybody staying within the European Union and fulfilling, accepting our legislation.
Ambassador, just last question to you before I let you go. We have a bit under 2 minutes. I want to go back to how you spoke about, what Merz said about frozen Russian assets. He did speak with Cypriot president, right, Nikos Christodoulidis.
Yes.
And he said that the proposal is currently being examined by the EU Commission. However, we're also in constant bilateral and multilateral talks with various member states in the EU to see whether we can go down this path together. What can we expect?
Well, the general idea from the point of view, I would say, of the social sentiment and the fact who is the aggressor. These are Russians, not Ukrainians. And that their money deposited in the central banks in very many Western countries should be, from the, so say, I say, biblical reason even, used to co-finance the defense of Ukraine. But on the other hand, our countries, democratic countries, are afraid that Russians probably will reply also by grabbing the remnants, for instance, assets of Western companies on their territory. It's a global war in this sense. So one step may launch another counter step from the other side, and therefore these long enduring doubts.
Thank you so much, former ambassador to Germany and France, Mr. Andrzej Byrt, for being with us here this morning on World Talks.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching this episode of World Talks. I'm Skaya. I'll see you next time.